If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what's a local legend/horror story in your town everyone collectively believes or tells? There's an urban legend in my town about a bus full of children in the 70s that went up Gold Camp Road, this narrow, dirt incline into the mountains, and went over the side, killing everyone on the bus. Legend has it that if you drive up that road and park your car where the bus went over the side, you'll get little handprints all over your car from the ghost children. It's amazing to me how many locals still believe this story. There's an old summer camp far into the woods near my town. Every kid that goes there learns the story of Skibo Bates. When the camp first opened, they had a big bonfire for all the kids that night, and some of them started picking on poor young Skibo. He gets shoved and trips into the fire, which sets his clothes up in flames, and he runs from the beach into the large lake the camp was built near. They never found him that night or recovered his body. The counselors all say if you sneak out of your cabins at night, Skibo will find you and take his revenge. Yes, I know it's bullshit to scare and keep the young kids in their cabins at night. There's a house near me that until recently was painted all green, and for years there were numerous rumors about it, including the owner killed his family in a car accident when driving under the influence. He then painted the home green, which symbolizes forgiveness and in a gesture to embarrass himself. The house was painted green following the death of the owner's wife, whose favorite color was green, and thus the entire house was painted that color in her honor. The owners went through a messy divorce where the husband didn't want the wife to have the proceeds of the house sale, so he painted it green to depreciate the value. When the house was repainted white and put up for sale, the real story was revealed, which was that the owner was an old man who lost his mental faculties and did it for no logical reason at all. That our local homeless guy, who was actually pretty famous, was on national TV a couple of times, was secretly a millionaire who went crazy when his wife died. Just a dumb story people tell because they think it's cool even though it's ridiculous. We have the Bandage Man. It's basically a story of a guy who either got cut up, fell into a wood chipper, got into a fight with a bear, it really depends on who you ask, and now wanders the woods along the highway, covered in bandages. If you are unlucky enough to pull over, he'll get in your car and kill you. I just recently saw a flyer on the bulletin board at the local post office asking for people's stories so someone can make a mockumentary. Last year on Mother's Day, a guy walked into my town's only grocery store carrying a severed head. It was his mom's head. BTW. He stabbed a worker of the store and went absolutely batty. No matter how many people I explain it to, they all think he was from our little podunk town. He wasn't. He walked about 10 to 12 miles to take his mom to the store on Mother's Day. It's kind of been a blessing and a curse, really. Weird hipsters stay away from our town, thinking it is filled with nut jobs, while crazy homeless druggies flock to our town like it's Mecca. Lucifer, the demon bronco of the Denver airport. Basically, this sculptor designed a giant rearing blue Mustang statue to put in front of the Denver airport. Denver's the home of the Broncos football team, whose colors are blue and orange. Before it was finished, however, it collapsed onto and killed the sculptor. That, plus the fact that its eyes glow red at night and that it just generally looks terrifying, has created a local legend that it's sentient, demonic, and steals the souls of tourists passing through the airport. Every time I fly, I say a brief prayer as I drive by, asking Lord Lucifer to stay his rage and grant me safe passage. There's a rundown mansion outside of the small town I grew up in. Story is back in the day the owners had a massive house party, but the second floor collapsed due to the weight and killed several. The dude who owns it legit lives next to it in a small trailer. The driveway is really long and covered with trees. So we would try to see who could get closest to the house before he noticed and started shooting his rifle in the air. I don't think kids mess with it that much anymore though. Emperor Norton. He was born in England and moved to San Francisco around the gold rush. Initially a well-respected businessman, he lost everything he owned with a risky investment in Peruvian rice. He faded into obscurity for a few years, maybe even left the Bay Area for a while, before returning to prominence in 1859 by unilaterally declaring himself Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico. He promptly began issuing decrees such as, "Whoever after due and proper warning shall be heard to utter the abominable word Frisco, which has no linguistic or other warrant, shall be deemed guilty of a high misdemeanor, and shall pay into the imperial treasury as penalty the sum of $25. And whereas, we issued our decree ordering the citizens of San Francisco and Oakland to appropriate funds for the survey of a suspension bridge from Oakland Point via Goat Island, also for a tunnel, and to ascertain which is the best project, and whereas the said citizens have hitherto neglected to notice our said decree, and whereas we are determined our authority shall be fully respected, Now, therefore, we do hereby command the arrest by the army of both the boards of city fathers if they persist in neglecting our decrees. Given under our royal hand and seal at San Francisco, this 17th day of September, 1872. He also minted his own currency. It was all the bogus ramblings of a crazy person, but true to San Francisco's quirky spirit, the city basically played along. His favorite establishments accepted his currency as payment, and when he died, the Chronicle ran a headline reading La Roia Mort, and some accounts say 30,000 people lined the streets for his procession, which was well over 1/10 the entire city's population at the time. His bridge/tunnel decree was prescient, as today there is a suspension bridge between Oakland and San Francisco via Goat Island, now called Yerba Buena Island, and there is also an immersed tube carrying BART trains between the two cities. There was a community push to rename the bridge after him recently, but sadly it failed. I've lived in several towns, ones with populations from 100,000 to 5,000 people. There's always a group of people, usually moderately successful in business, who party hard together. The rest of the town are convinced there's partner swapping/sharing going on at these gatherings. Never been any evidence and no one's seen it, but have always heard from a friend of a friend who was at the party, but left when the shenanigans started. Hey, it's probably happened occasionally, but every time? Kids would always talk about a bridge called Gibbs Bridge being haunted, and they would go there in like middle school to be edgy kids. There were about 1,000 different stories about why it's haunted, but everyone claims they've seen ghosts or heard the pickup truck of the dead guy. I crossed the bridge once. It's barely even a bridge and it's just over a tiny creek and it's just full of graffiti and in the middle of the country. There is a road on the outskirts of town called Constitution Doctor. It is an unpaved road that lead to an old-looking farmhouse after about a mile down. The legend is that in this house an entire family of inbred albino people live there and that they will murder anyone who gets too close to the house. It's constantly driven on by teenagers smoking weed and stuff, and no one has ever been murdered. So the one time I drove down it, however, there were a pair of headlights behind my friends and I, which scared the shit out of us and made us turn around. When we turned around, the other car was gone that was behind us. It was pretty freaky. It's a very narrow road with a cliff on one side and a steep hill on the other, so it's not easy to turn around and disappear. Native West Texan. La Llorona, El Chupacabra, and aliens are very real to us. El Chupacabra is usually blamed for livestock deaths, sheep and goats on small ranches. People will buzz about it for a day or two and it'll be over. No offense to sheep, but they're dumb enough to accidentally kill themselves, and I don't think they need much help. La Llorona wasn't part of my collective conscience until I was older, but people keeping their kids away from rivers was very common in my area, though absolutely with good reason, because water quality and flash flooding made it sketchy at best. Aliens? Now that's the one I'm more willing to believe. West Texas is extremely empty, in case you've never been, so you see strange lights in some of the darkest and most isolated parts of the country? That's weird. That's worth suspicion. One very localized one was told to me by my Spanish teacher in high school: the Ghost Motel up one of the highways outside of town. It looked like a 50s drive-in motel, and when he first moved here it was open, people were there, lights were on, and he stopped and talked to the desk clerk asking for directions. When he got into town, allegedly he mentioned it to his neighbor and they told him the place had been closed for 30 years. He drove back, and sure enough it was boarded up, abandoned, and in awful shape. People made a habit of going out there on dares, and there's been a few weird stories, but I'm suspicious of the merit to them. The Manchester Pusher. Manchester, England is a city with a large downtown canal and river network. There's an urban legend that a serial killer is active who wanders the city's waterways and pushes people into the water and leaves them to drown. According to the local police, there were 28 unexplained deaths in the water between 2008 and 2014. Family members of some of these victims insist that their loved one's death was no accident, even though the police have written off the pusher as an urban legend. There is a road in a wooded area near where I live, and the street is literally called Hairy Man Road. Legend goes that there was a kid who was separated from his family when they were trying to escape some bad weather, in the 1800s. He ended up surviving alone in the woods and terrorized people who would come through. Eventually he was trampled to death by some people/horses passing by that he tried to scare. I forget how weird the name of the road is until I have to say it out loud. There are Hairy Man festivals each year in my town, and the hairiest man legit wins a prize. So weird, Lamau. Some people built a house in our town. It's a waterfront property with a swimming pool for some reason. It's surrounded by security fence and even has spotlights. People in town referred to the place as Mafia Retreat. I met the people who live there. They're the second owners. Although we don't know much about the original owners, The people who live there currently had it officially renamed Mafia Retreat. Chapel Hill, Tennessee. The story varies based on who tells it, but I'll tell you the gist. Long ago, when train tracks had to be manually switched, a switch operator was killed by an oncoming train. Legend has it that to this day you can see him carrying his lantern down the tracks. People have reported it moving through their cars when stopped on the tracks at night. There are videos on YouTube of the light. Chapel Hill is a small town, so the lights from an airplane or lights from cars going X direction don't explain it. Most people around here, if pressed, would tell you they tend to believe it due to so many people experiencing it. The Banana Fairy. He is a magical young man who skateboards around town at night in a banana suit and fairy wings and gives those who he deems worthy presents. Mostly drugs, but sometimes snack cakes. I saw him a bunch since I was an avid late night wanderer, but my favorite time was seeing him doing laundry at the laundromat while I was driving to town. I assumed the poor guy had run out of clothes and was forced to don his alter ego attire. Much love, Banana Fairy. There's one road in the town I was born in that's supposedly one of the most haunted places in New Jersey. It's called Clinton Road, and it's a really long stretch with all forest on one side and a lake on the other with no fence in between or street lights. People have reported seeing headlights behind them, then turning around and there's no car there, seeing phantom hitchhikers, etc. My favorite story though is that there's the ghost of a little boy there that will throw your coins back into the road if you toss them into the lake. One time when my brother and I were little, we threw a coin into the lake to see if it would happen, and my dad noticed, so he slyly threw another one out the window and into the street. We figured it out eventually, but he scared the shit out of us, LMFAO. So the high school I went to has a trailer with a crawl space under it that is on a hill, so if you go under it from the front and go as far as you can, you'll eventually hit hill. When I was in high school, I made up a story to the freshmen who wanted to go under there to smoke that a kid disappeared back there and nobody ever found his body, and it was thought that a hobo or meth head ate him. That scared them, and I guess they told their parents or someone at school about it, and the cops came and brought a K-9 unit to investigate because apparently there was a missing kid from the school. I wasn't aware. Obviously they didn't find anything, but my nephew goes to that school now, 6 years later, and the seniors still tell the freshmen about the cannibal hobo under the trailer. Guess my story was just feasible enough to stick. I lived in Savannah, Georgia for a while, about 4 years, and it is collectively known as the most haunted city in America. So my girlfriend and I at the time got a place of Jones Street, voted the most beautiful street in America several times by like Better Homes and Gardens and Condé Nast Traveler and shit. But we got it for really cheap. Why? Because it had been investigated and found to be haunted. Now, I don't know if this is still the case. But apparently back in 2006 there was some kind of legitimate law in Savannah that if a place had been purported to be haunted, some kind of investigation had to go into it, and if the investigation found it to be haunted, the real estate agent had to disclose that and also lower the rent. So we were about $150 to $200 lower on the rent than others on that same street for this townhouse. As was disclosed, a father had locked his daughter in the attic where she had starved to death, and some weird shit happened sometimes, giggling, doors unlocking, pitter-patter of little feet running through. I didn't think anything of it. In fact, we slept in the room that had the attic door where she apparently was locked in and starved in. But then weird shit actually started happening. Legitimately. We would lock the door. I'm talking 3 locks plus a deadbolt. That fucker would be unlocked every time. Little feet running downstairs, thought it was a possum or raccoon loose in the house, never figured it out. Then the giggling downstairs started. It was always downstairs. Then my girlfriend started waking up damn near hyperventilating and seeing green as she said it, everything would turn green. Shortly after that we moved out. In Savannah there are many stories. For example, one of the biggest graveyards in Savannah in the middle of the historic district is Abercorn Cemetery. It used to be open all day and night, you can walk through it, sit on a bench, etc. But they started locking it up at nights due to just too many damn instances of sacrificed chickens and goats and dug into graves. The reason is because Gullah people would come down from the South Carolina lowlands to take the grave dirt and do sacrifices for curses and other rituals. You never want to find grave dirt on your front porch. Another thing is all the shutters in the city being painted Haitian blue to ward off evil spirits and keep them out. Another story that everyone believes is the Moon River Brewery haunting. There's a bar called Moon River Brewery and the building has 3 stories. It's a really busy, popular bar for both locals and tourists alike, so they started renovating the 3rd floor to make more room. But so many instances of tools moving around, a boy being spotted around, people being pushed, things being thrown, ladders falling, entire crews would get freaked out. Moon River went through every fucking contractor in the city, they all quit. Eventually they just gave up and the floor sits up there, nobody is allowed to go there, and it's just half renovated. There are just too many stories to tell about that city, really. Not really a local legend, but the older residents are scared to death of the lake I live on. It's considered two separate lakes, but are hydrologically the same. It's relatively small and separated by a peninsula that juts halfway out into the lake. The one they're afraid of has a steep bank, and deepens to 50 feet quickly. The water is an unnatural dark color, almost black, and they absolutely refuse to swim in it. Why they own a home on said lake is beyond me. I don't swim in it not because of the fear, but because the water is absolutely disgusting and has a certain smell. Where I grew up, it was a popular urban legend to stumble upon satanic ritual sites. Basically a building graffitied with pentagrams and hell or devil rules. One time I was wandering in a field around my house and found the remains of a small bonfire and a bunch of liquor bottles. The scary part was an old rusty animal cage, and we found a raccoon skeleton in the area. Pretty sure it was coincidence and obnoxious teens, but it got our imaginations going. Really a horror story, but more a superstition. A lot of hairdressers are closed on Wednesdays because it's bad luck to get your hair cut then. According to a website, it says in the ancient times people believed that Wednesday was the day of growth and development. It was also considered auspicious time. The members of royal family and noblemen preferred to have a haircut on Wednesdays, therefore there was a rule to prohibit common people to have a haircut in the same day. It was considered an inauspicious event to do the same activity in the same day, as if you tried to compare your prestige to the royal family. Don't know if that counts though. Holcomb Road. It's haunted. It's not disputed. It's in buttfuck nowhere, Ohio. It's a little old road that goes through the Holcomb Woods. Your gas levels plummet the longer you're on the road, and if you turn the car off there's a good chance it won't start right back up. You can see children's faces in the greenery, supposedly the spirits of the children who died in a school bus accident. Classic. If you park at the entrance of the woods you'll see a light that doesn't belong. If you go into the woods the light will literally chase you out. It's local legend and everyone knows it as fact here. Lake Tahoe is the second largest perfectly preserved mortuary in the world. The water below 600 feet is permanently at 39 degrees Fahrenheit or below, so no bacteria grows and bodies don't decay, bloat and rise to the surface. No one wants to go down and actually check because the lake used to be a burial ground for a few of the Native American tribes originally in the area, and doing so would obviously be very disrespectful. There are apparently also tons of bodies of Chinese workers from when the Transcontinental Railroad was being built as well. The lake also has an undercurrent that spins counterclockwise, so the bodies are constantly moving in a circle. There's allegedly thousands of bodies down there, and no one is willing to check. When people go missing in the lake, they can't be retrieved past 200 feet, since you can't see. The filmmaker Jacques Cousteau actually went down there in a submarine, and there is transcript available somewhere of what he reportedly saw, and he said the world is not ready for what's down there. I didn't believe the story until I went out on a charter fishing boat and we pulled up a piece of scalp, hair still on it and everything. It looked like our lure scratched the side of the dude's face. No decay at all. We just got the line and pretended it didn't happen. We just had these random weird guys. Mental, not on the good side, so to say. There was the Rainmaker man who would stand on random fields for hours and run toward random people screaming if they came near. He would always do some weird dances and prayer shit and every day be at another village. This is why he was called the Rainmaker. The other guy was some boy, he was 19 years old last I heard of him, who would always chase children, and some adults, while having a knife in hand. He carved some figures with that knife and wanted to show off his figures. But he'd always have his knife in the other hand. So he would wait at the bus stop and children get out. They freak out at a guy running with a knife at them and run away, and he runs after them. Both were not dangerous, just creepy AF. They tell that if you stay late at a bar close to the abandoned part of the city, you would notice the figure of a very sexy girl trying to make you follow her. She doesn't turn around, neither speak at any time, and is wearing a veil covering her face. You would feel like hypnotized by her perfume and her hips, making you follow her to the most dark part of the town. When you reach a very old and creaky house, she would turn around and reveal her face, and then, suddenly her smell becomes the one of rotten meat and her face would be one full of worm skull. If you run away, you would be safe, but if she gets to kiss you, you would instantly die and your body would never be found. That our local dam, that is the second biggest in the country, has mutant catfish in it. It was built in the 80s with the intention to supply nearby fields with water, but due to some complications it never reached its intended goal. Anyways, On the bottom of the dam there are 2 villages, and the people from it were forced to move to nearby towns/villages in order for the dam to be built. The only thing that is not entirely engulfed by water is the church of one of the villages, Divovsi, which is the birthplace of my grandma, and the icons are gone, everything. The only eerie and creepy thing staying is a highly erased but still recognizable mural of Satan. Some believe that this is a reminder of the buried lives, stories and memories at the bottom of the dam. The other thing about the dam is that many people believe there are mutant monster catfish lurking in the depths. I'm not sure about this statement, but I do believe there was some kind of chemical/substance leak from a nearby mine, which essentially contaminated the water with arsenic, and thus the mutations happened. So, a local story that my father told me was that a person drowned and divers were sent to find the body. When they got out of the water, they were speechless and in panic. Now, the scary thing is that the hair of one of them partially turned white from fear and the lips of the other one were pale white. When confronted about what happened/they saw, they only said that they saw fucking huge catfish, over 4 to 5 meters, lurking in the deep. The interesting fact is that in 2016 a local fisherman actually caught a fucking 2-meter catfish that was bigger than a human. So, yeah, there definitely are big fucking fish down there, but no one dares to go and dive after the story with the divers. Another story that I've heard is from other divers that do it as a hobby, who dived and were terrified of the view. A nearly pitch dark environment, only their flashlights, or the things divers use to bring light into the darkness, haha, and the lights they had actually revealed a scary scenery, huge patches of forests, abandoned machinery, remains of houses and even a graveyard. Safe to say, they noped the fuck out of the waters. The final thing, which is not so scary but definitely catastrophic if happens. The dam is located above the town and the wall supporting it is not maintained regularly. There are many reports about the surrounding land and rocks that state that the wall may crack if not renovated. If this happens, the whole town will be flooded and possibly wiped out because of the sheer size of the dam. I can only imagine what could happen. My town had a haunted house in it. It's not actually haunted. Why I say this? I started the rumor. We were goofing off one night back in high school years and went driving around. We found this old dilapidated house and went spelunking. I took pictures with a flash on just to take pictures. My reasoning was that I wanted to try and capture a ghost. Well, anyways, I take the pictures home and Photoshop a demonic looking ghost face into one of the windows and mass text it to everyone I knew. Word spread that it was haunted, so I played it up. I'd make up stories and say that this guy told me about it. Then when he'd be like, "Hi, I don't remember that," I'd remind him about it. Sure enough, 4 to 5 elder people in the town have stories about the haunted house. There's a road called Lick Road that dead ends into a nature preserve where a woman named Amy has said to be murdered and her baby kidnapped. They say if you go to the end of the road and say, "Amy, I have your baby," she'll appear and attack you. There's also a haunted bar called Bobby Mackey's that used to be like a slaughterhouse or something, and all of the workers died and now haunt the building. It's basically become a museum exhibit now, and I don't think anyone actually believes it. A little backstory first. So in a slightly sketchy part of the city of Birmingham, Alabama, there is an intersection of various places we call 5 Points South. In the center of 5 Points South, there is a big Methodist church. And in front of said church, is a fountain with statues of a goat-headed man reading from a book to a bunch of animals. If you ask around, everyone will swear to you that it is a symbol of Satan and is a meet-up spot for pagans and or Satanists. A lot of people call it the devil worshipper fountain. The real story is much less interesting than it being some kind of meet-up for dark rituals or whatever they've been saying lately. Some local art dealer died. The fountain was put up as a memorial to him by a local artist, and the reason it's got a goat man is because the artist who made it just really liked the idea of a smart animal being a teacher or something. It had something to do with weird southern storytelling cliches or something, I think. Nowadays, it's mostly just a hangout spot for homeless people or for drunk idiots who had too many at one of the several bars nearby, but if you ask around you'll still hear the same rumors of Satanism. If you look up the 5 Points Storyteller, you should be able to find a couple of news articles about the thing. A man and his donkey are supposedly entombed in one of my town's landmarks. My town was settled at the beginning of the industrial era by a population of German and Irish immigrants. First they dug canals, then they built railroads. A big bridge with 4 big arches had to be built across a river for the trains to cross. Projects like were complete at breakneck speed, and OSHA wasn't around yet. So the story goes that during the construction a man and his donkey fell into the concrete, and rather than delay construction to save them, they just poured more concrete over them. There's even a green square painted over their concrete grave and memorial plaque. I doubt it's true, but men died building it. To the local populace, It probably felt like the bridge was eating them. I don't know if this counts, but in my town, we've had very few murders, so the ones we have kinda stick out. This is the creepiest one I know. It took place about 15 years ago. I actually knew the guy. He was one of those conspiracy hippies. He published his own monthly rag/zine that he'd print out on the local college's printers. Drove the computer staff nuts, as he was always trying to import weird fonts that wouldn't work. I got stoned with him a few times. He always had good weed, but he would go on long energetic rants about the Illuminati and the Bush family and all this. I had other things to do. So this guy was nice enough, seemed harmless, but he also snorted coke, and so he knew some shady people. He got involved in a deal, the details of which I don't really know, except that the people involved, a young guy and an older Russian dude, chose to kill him instead of making the deal. They found the guys pretty quickly. These guys weren't the sharpest tools in the shed. The young kid made a plea deal to turn state's evidence against the older guy, who had a long rap sheet in Russia, got a life sentence. Here's where it gets creepy. They decided to hide their crime by cutting up his body and hiding it in various spots in a nearby wooded area. The cops dug up the body. It was in plastic bags, except they never found his head. The killers couldn't remember, so there's a buried head somewhere in this particular part of town, near a high school, to boot, that no one has yet found. Diversitech Insane Asylum that they renamed to Manteno State Hospital in Manteno, Illinois, about an hour outside Chicago. I went to college here right as they were starting to tear down the buildings, but a bunch of us would go out there because it spanned over tons of acres, all connected by an underground tunnel, which was where the pipes connected. We went down there one night in the early 2000s, on Halloween, cause we thought it would be creepy. Starting going through some of the old rooms and heard chanting. By the time we got there were about 20 people dressed in all black we could barely see. They told us to leave, they were just about to start their satanic ritual. We GTFO out of there so fast, I've never been more bothered down to my core. For those wondering, it was a huge facility back in the day, and they would do crazy experiments on mentally ill patients to try and study the mind better. They had to shut it down because patients would wander in the corn and just die cause no one could find them. There were electric chairs and tables, dead cats in cages, messages written in, what I presumed, cat blood. Most people at the college today don't know about it cause they dozed it all for housing. But there has always been a glow above where it was in the sky. Purple, I think. It's the way we always found it in the car cause it's in the middle of BFE. We have this guy we all call Marijuana Mike. We believe he was huge into drug trade. He's probably in his early 60s and always drives a tricked out Huffy around town with his shirt off and long white beard. Used to live in an extremely nice Mantoon and have Hummers and sports cars. Then one day he went away for a long time, came back, lives in a trailer and rides his tricked out Huffy. Some call him Jesus too because he kinda resembles him. Good guy though, talked to him a couple times on the street passing by, seems very intelligent. The haunted pillar, in my hometown of Augusta, Georgia. Supposedly was cursed by a preacher way back in the 19th century after he was told he couldn't preach there, because it was right next to the market downtown. He proclaimed that the market would be destroyed by a great wind and that pillar the only thing left. Oh, yeah, and if anyone tried to remove the pillar, they'd be struck dead. Well, February of 1878, Augusta gets a rare winter tornado, and who'da thunk it, the city market is gone like it had been asked to pick up the whole check for dinner. But the pillar was still standing. So the legend grew. The damn thing even looked haunted, this old crumbling cement pillar that looked totally out of place in the middle of downtown Augusta, which can actually look fairly nice when it tries. Until December of 2016 when some idiot ran into with his car. Still waiting to see the outcome of that dude's fate. There's talk of rebuilding it, or they may have already, I'm not 100% sure. Side note, the pillar had been struck by vehicles before, and subsequently rebuilt, in one case even moving it back further off the curb to prevent that from happening again. However, Augusta drivers can be utter shit at the best of times. Wolfman's cabin. It got blown up for some kid's film project, but for the longest time as a kid it was a trial of will and bravery. Kids would go up there and hang out, trying to stay there in the dark for as long as possible. The story I always heard as a kid was the guy lived there with his family, and he went nuts and killed them with an axe. Afterwards, he went to live with the wolves as a feral man, hence Wolfman's cabin. Sucks that it got blown up. My friends went out there and they swears to this day it was haunted. Said they saw something large and imposing moving towards them from the trees. But he could be full of shit, or just saw like a bear or something. Everyone tells it, but nobody believes certain part of it, for a good reason. Axe Murder Hollow is an old property in the backwoods of the county where a man went berserk and murdered his entire family with an axe. That part people believe, and as far as I remember it's completely true. However, people also love to talk about the ghost of the family that now wanders the woods, trying to hide from the ghost of the murderer who still carries an axe around the house. Nobody believes it because this ghost story is actually a cautionary tale about ghost stories. The police actually got to the bottom of how the ghost myths spread so fast. You see, near the hollow there is an old chicken farmer. He was spreading tales of seeing shadowy figures moseying around in the woods, how he tried to scare them off and they just disappeared. Later, other neighbors reported hearing wails and screaming coming from the hollow. Lastly, some teenagers claimed to have visited the hollow on a dare, gotten lost, and were chased around by a crazy man. Individually these sound like great ghost stories, and the people telling them probably would have believed them until the day they died. However, together they tell the tale of teenagers wandering onto the chicken farmer's land by mistake, the farmer scaring them off with an axe, and their terrified screams waking the neighbors. In my town, and the surrounding few towns, we all know the Bird Lady, although her name sometimes varies town to town. In one town, Jupiter, everyone referred to her as the Jupiter Gypsy. She is a frail-looking woman with insanely large and frizzy black hair, excessive makeup all over her face, who looks kinda like a bird and is often seen yelling at birds. She's also often spotted at certain bus stops, Target parking lots, hospital parking lots, or just walking down the street talking to the birds. She gets spotted as north as Jupiter and as south as Lake Worth, which is about 25 miles distance. Some rumor that she is actually almost 80 years old, some have rumors about where she came from, and some think she is just some crazy homeless lady who knows how to ride a public bus. I choose to believe she's a mystical creature gifted to us from above, to bring us together and spread a sense of community, or that she's a strange-looking homeless woman. In the end of 1700s in Bergen, Norway there were an awful midwife called the Midwife from Hell. She collected unwanted babies, paid a little bit for them, from poor families and went up the mountains. Halfway up one of the mountains there is a man-made lake called Svartidiket. It's where the majority of Bergen get our drinking water, but I don't know if they did in 1700. She took the basket with 5 or more babies at a time, held their feet and crushed their skull on a big stone. She then put rocks inside of their skull so they would sink better. The people seeing her thought they looked directly at the devil himself and wouldn't dare telling anyone. The midwife couldn't have a baby herself and also forced babies inside of her to simulate the feeling of being pregnant. When they found her dead, her uterus were inflamed and rotten, and they sank her in Svartidiket so she could lay there with all of the babies she had murdered. We also have trolls. I am from Kerala, southern India. They have family-based gods we worship. Most of them are the different forms of Lord Shiva. One of such god is Kadakathan, god of sorcery, and this is the story I heard from my grandmother. There was a priest back then in our local Kadakathan temple, and he used to do this morning ritual of lighting lamps in front of the temple and did meditation in front of it. One fine day his little boy was playing near him and making lots of noise. Annoyed by his son, he prayed to Kadakathan to shut him up, and there it was. His son becomes mute in that instant. Not only that, his iris went up like Undertaker, he also laid on the ground without moving. The priest got freaked out and took him to many local doctors, Vaidyans, we used to call them, and nothing helped. It's up to you if you want to believe this story or not. This is a true story, and I still visit the temple to this day and I see portraits of that priest and his son on the wall. Told by people who really have no intention to lie to you. You know. There is only one legend that has been around forever in my small town since 1960-something. In our old town there's this old pub, and one fall night a group of teenagers broke in and stole bottles of liquor. They went down the train tracks nearby and off into the forest to build a campfire. One of them was being careless drunk and ended up knocking their friend in, and they burned to death. They buried the body to hide the evidence. Then a week later the same kids were found being hung at the spot of the campfire with burns that made them almost unrecognizable. Rumor has it if you and friends build a fire at the spot during night, the spirits of the dead teens will curse you. House down my block is believed to be the scene of a grisly murder-suicide. No clue how the story started amongst the local children, but apparently, a priest from the church, about 500 feet away, went to the house to perform an exorcism 30 years ago. He himself became possessed, drained the bodies of their blood into the bathtub, and chopped the family into little pieces. He spent the next few days bathing in the blood of his victims and eating their succulent meat. When another priest came to check on him a couple days later, he attacked. The second priest escaped and called the police. When the police arrived, the crazy priest barricaded himself in the house. When the police tried to get in, the priest set himself on fire and the house burned to the ground. On the anniversary of the self-immolation, which no one knows when that is, they say you can see the silhouette of a burning man through the curtains. My kids were all wrapped up in the story, telling me it was true because some asshole friend of theirs said so. I like a good creepy legend, but when I did a little digging, not a single part of the story is true. However, I mentioned it to a neighbor who's lived a couple doors down since the subdivision was built in 1978. He said that the family living there in the mid-80s had a child die. They divorced and moved away. That's the extent of anything unusual at that house. The story of Anson Miner. The story went that Anson Miner was a farmer with land beside a popular summer camp. One day while tending his fields, his tractor broke down. While trying to repair it, the machine sprung to life and sucked his leg into the thresher, all but destroying it. Anson survived the grisly incident, but forever after walked with a limp and was hampered in his efforts to save his already faltering farm. Year after year his debts mounted, and year after year the camp offered to help him, but it wasn't until the bank intervened and foreclosed on his farm that Anson Miner was forced to face his failure. He carried his lantern into the barn, limped up a ladder, ran a noose over the rafters and hanged himself. The story goes that for years after, a strange green glow could be seen late at night. And curious campers who dared to learn more first heard a low, ominous stomp drag sound and were then greeted by a limping, moaning ghostly presence.